Good evening, everyone. Like Rhys said, my name is Henry. I'm an ordinand, which means I'm a trainee vicar. But as she said, this is very sadly my last Sunday on the team here. Well, technically, I'm not actually part of the team anymore. We had our last team meeting on Tuesday, and that's where we get to the silver lining, is that today I'm technically a guest preacher. I get to get away with saying whatever I like. And I do notice that Mark is actually in this time, so I will behave this morning. But in all seriousness, it has been an absolute pleasure to serve at this church. In just under 2 months, I'm going to be starting my curacy, which is basically the probationary vicar position in any church. But it means a lot of change. It means a new routine. It means meeting new people. It means a wife. It doesn't come with a job. It's just a lot of changes are happening in one go. But more importantly, it means I have to face my least favorite thing in the entire world, and that is just one sentence. It is a group of words bunched together that always bring fear to my heart. And it is just the combination of words that are so, Henry, tell me about yourself. I absolutely can't stand it because I don't know what to say. What do you want to know? Do you want to know about my childhood? Do you want to know about my education, my job? Do you want to know if I like long walks on the beach? Am I a dog or am I a cat person? Who really knows? I'm absolutely a dog person. But when people ask this, they're just trying to get to know us. But my problem with it is that no matter how much time I spend answering, no matter what I tell them, they aren't going to really know me. All they're really going to get is a highlight reel. The best bits, the parts of me that I have consolidated to present the least awkward, the most cool version of myself that I can muster. Like an album, like that. Now that's what I call Henry. I hope that joke isn't lost on the generation now. Remember CDs? But we tell people the best bits about ourselves because we want them to assume the best of us. And I'd love to try something quickly. If you're sat next to somebody, we're just going to do a little fun thing. What if we didn't just share the best bits? What if you just looked at the person next to you, looked deep into their eyes, to spend a real moment getting to soul search that person, and in your mind just think of the one thing you would never tell that person. And now go ahead and tell them. No, don't do it. Today is not the day for dirty laundry. But imagine if that was the only way we could possibly introduce ourselves, with no filter, sharing our most vulnerable secrets, the things about ourselves that we are not proud of. And this isn't something we often talk about. How often do we go about our lives just pretending that our life is that highlight reel? Instead of being messy and broken, instead of being a vulnerable person who fails at things, who gets things wrong, who wishes they could be better. And if people knew that truth, how do you think they would respond? Do you think they'd still like you? Or do you think they might disqualify you? Would you be afraid of them alienating you, wanting nothing to do with you? Well, at the moment in Citizen, we've been looking at the book of Colossians, which is a letter written by the Apostle Paul to the church in Colossae. And we've been doing this because it captures the unbelievable joy, but also the unbelievable struggles of following Jesus in our lives. And the title of today's sermon is Colossal Reconciliation. And we're reading from Colossians chapter 1, verses 21 to 23, and it's going to be up on the screens for you. Thank you. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now, he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you have heard and that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant. When I was at university, I had a friend on the same course as me, and he knew that I was a Christian. He was not a Christian, and he could not fathom why every single Sunday I went to a church, and he just had this image of a musty, old, cold, damp building, and he couldn't even get why I'd go more than once on a Sunday, let alone just once. But I was going to Harbour Church in Portsmouth. It was anything but musty. It was the church that helped plant this church, Citizen. and I absolutely loved it. And I was convinced that if I could get my friend through the doors, he would love it as well. He'd absolutely get it. And I invited him over and over and over again for a grand total of 3 years. And I only managed to get him to one thing, and that was a student pub quiz, because I convinced him it was the least Christian thing he could possibly come to. And he just about managed to get through the door and have a Budweiser. But in 3 years, he never came to a Sunday, because every time I invited him, he gave the same joking response. As soon as I walk through the door, I'll burst into flames because I'm not as good as the people inside. And part of me wanted to say, you just need to meet them. Like, that expectation is going to go as soon as you have your first chat on a Sunday morning. But if I'm being honest, it really annoyed me. I could not get over why my friend would continually disqualify himself, how he would just constantly do it. And I was convinced if I just get him into the church, he's going to stop. If I get him into the church, he'll be fixed. But it made me think that it isn't just something that happens to my friend. It's something that happens to all of us, all the time. Even inside the church, the people here, we feel the same way. How often do we become aware of our own brokenness, our own vulnerabilities, the things inside us that we deem to be imperfect? And I think one of the biggest misunderstandings about Christianity is that we are saved by being good. We are saved by the things we do, by our works. And so when we don't live up to our own standards, those things we hold ourselves to, we don't think we're worthy. We don't believe that we are capable of being forgiven, capable of being loved. Before we address that, there's something I really want to make clear to each and every person here today. All of us, me included, none of us are perfect. We are all flawed. We can't escape it. But Paul knew that the Colossians were facing that same fate. The team have done a fantastic job of unpacking the rest of Colossians, the bits just before these verses. And we know that the letter was written by Paul, as we've said, an apostle of Christ, while he's in prison to this church. And he starts by introducing himself. He says, I'm Paul. You've heard of me maybe from this guy called Epaphras. And I just want to say, we know who we are and we love what you're doing. You are so good. You're part of this new family of believers. We are hearing your struggles. We're seeing what you're going through and we are cheering you on. We are praying for you. You are known to us and you are loved by us. And then he talks about God. He writes about Jesus Christ, why he's worthy of our worship. He puts him up at such a pedestal. He tries to do everything he can to capture all the greatness of God in just a short letter. But he talks about the supremacy of God, how God dwells perfectly within the being of Jesus Christ. And then we get to this evening's passage, where Paul now talks about what this means for the Colossians. And he begins by saying, once you were alienated from God, which I think is a very weird way to kick things off. Here's all this amazing stuff. Here's this fantastic family that loves you. Here's this God who created you. You had nothing to do with it. It's a bit like going up to your partner, your best mate or something, and saying, my family, oh, God, my family really love you. But, they did not before, believe me. They had nothing to do with you before that. And the word alienated that we read in that passage is translated from the Greek word apelatromonos, which literally meant transferred to another owner. In short, Paul is saying, you didn't belong to God. You belonged to your own sin. You belonged to your unworthiness, to your own imperfections. There was no highlight reel. There were no redeeming qualities about you. And when God looked at the Colossians, that's what he saw. Paul does not mince his words at all. He says you were enemies to God. They were enemies. They were guilty. They were unworthy. But the sad truth is that we were in the same boots as the Colossians. We too faced alienation from God because of that imperfection in our lives. We were enemies. We were guilty. We were unworthy. So what's the solution? But now, he has reconciled you. He has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. That's it. We don't need a solution. The issue of our alienation has already been solved because of Jesus' death on the cross. Because of Jesus' death, those who were enemies became friends. Those who were guilty became blameless. Those who were deemed unworthy are now ultimately worthy to be used for God's glory. And if that seems too simple, if it seems too straightforward, that's okay, because it absolutely is meant to be too simple. It's why I struggled so long to write this sermon, because it's actually a very brief point. I can't talk about this for 20 minutes, or so I thought, because amongst the Colossians, there's a group of people called the Gnostics. And they also believed that the gospel was far too simple, that it wasn't enough. The basic premise of their beliefs is that they did not believe that Jesus was God. They saw God, who they took to be real, but God is spirit, and spirit is perfect. Spirit is good. But they also see this man called Jesus, and man is not good, because man is part of creation, and creation is ultimately evil. They just thought that Jesus was a kind of mediator, like someone with special knowledge who somehow knew the secret path that you could use to get to God. And the only way to achieve salvation was by learning that special knowledge. And apparently about finding passwords, like if you gave Jesus a special password, suddenly you were whisked up to heaven. That would be simple, but sadly that is not that simple. They believed that they could be reconciled to God by learning more, by becoming a godlier people, by just praying and becoming more spiritual, becoming better people, all these things. But Paul cuts the Gnostics down right in the middle and immediately tells them that salvation is not something we earn by doing good things or becoming some sort of super Christian. Salvation is for everybody. And the purpose of Jesus' coming to earth was reconciliation. He came to bridge that chasm between us and between God, because God's heart for us has always been love, has always been to reconcile us. Now, I would agree that that sounds like an oversimplification. If any of you ever try to read the Bible, it doesn't really make it apparent that everything's going perfectly all the way through the Old Testament. In fact, Jesus doesn't turn up until the New Testament. And then after the Gospels, we have all these letters where people are finally beginning to figure out that we're reconciled. But the Bible is the story of God offering reconciliation to humanity time and time again, and us continually throwing it back in his face. Now, to demonstrate that I'm not just making this up, I'm going to need to briefly explain the entirety of the Old Testament. So that's 39 books, 503,493 words, and I reckon I can do it in less than 60 seconds. Are we ready? Set your timers. God makes people. The people are given the law, but the people break the law. So then someone has this great idea. We're going to make some sacrifices. We're going to sacrifice animals to provide atonement for this. But the priests who offer the sacrifices then become malevolent. They start not helping. So then the judges come along and they say, well, let's just do what's right in our own eyes. But obviously that doesn't work. All right, we'll pick a king. We'll pick the tallest guy, maybe the most handsome guy, the strongest guy. Obviously that king becomes very, very selfish. So then we have the prophets. They say, well, give the prophets to the kings. They'll keep the kings in order. They'll tell the kings what to do, except we kill the prophets. And you begin to understand that through the course of millennia, God is saying, we need a better lawkeeper. We need a better judge. We need a better sacrifice. We need a better prophet, a better priest, a better king. Not all these things, but in Jesus. Done. Stop your timer. The more we know about what God has done for us through Jesus Christ, the great cost of our reconciliation and what that has bought for us, the more we begin to understand who we are in the eyes of God. But it does raise the question, why does reconciliation actually matter? Because without reconciliation, there can be no forgiveness. We talked earlier about what if we were only known by our secrets, about the bad things about ourselves. And the truth is that God sees all that. He sees every little thing about us. We don't get the opportunity to show God just the best bits. There's no way to hide it. There's no way to just present this highlight reel. And everything God sees, everything about us, makes us an enemy to God. But there's two words in verse 22 that make all the difference. He has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. Now, scholars say that those two words, to present, were primarily used in legal documents. And what it meant was to bring another before the court. So there I'll be, on the day I die, standing in the courtroom of heaven, and I can just imagine this stack of evidence, this stack of paper piled up against me, with all the reasons I should be disqualified from receiving God's grace. But in the midst of all of that, and just on the top, perhaps it's a tiny little pink post-it note, there's just one word written on all that evidence, and it says, reconciled. God sees all that evidence. He sees every reason that we are not worthy, but he still declares us worthy of love. And he did this by sending his son, Jesus Christ, to die for us. He didn't just click his fingers and suddenly all of it's wiped away. He paid a price that we as enemies to God actually owed. He paid it for us. And now, technically, God has done his part. It's over to us now. And it's not about being a better Christian. It's not about doing good things to prove that we're worthy. It's simply about accepting that we are reconciled, that a price has been paid on our behalf. Because when we accept that we are reconciled, we are forgiven. Paul specifies that our reconciliation was achieved through Christ's physical body. And that's not just a throwaway term that he was using to be dramatic. He was trying to say, this is a real thing. This is a real man that really died on a real cross. And it was done so that we can see the cross and know. He didn't just come along, Jesus, and say, hey guys, I'm the Son of God. I've wiped away all your sin. I'm just going to transfigure myself back up to heaven. See you later. No, he suffered wounds. He was beaten. His body bled, and he was lifted up on a cross for all of us to see. And when we see the cross, what we see is God's hand reaching out to us, saying, it is done. You are now reconciled once and for all. This can't be taken back. This can't be thrown in my face. You are reconciled. This is now and forever. It is finished. So when we see those bad things in ourselves, when we see those broken things, those imperfections, no matter how bad things seem, we can look at the cross and know that we are reconciled and know that we can be forgiven. And now it's over to you. We're still going to struggle, but that's why Paul says, do not move from this hope held out in the gospel. Some translations say, do not drift away. And that doesn't mean that just by living our lives, we're capable of losing our reconciliation. We're not disqualified. There's nothing we can do that would stop what Christ has already done for us. It just means that we need to remind ourselves of it each and every day, who we are in Christ. Because when we struggle, when we do bad things, it doesn't change what's already happened. It doesn't change the truth of Christ on the cross. I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up just before we go into a time of prayer ministry. But I just want to say that when we find ourselves in that same situation where we're asking questions, do you think God will still like you? Do you think God will like who you are? Do you think God will disqualify you? Are you going to be alienated by God because of what you've done? Remember that Christ and God, one and the same, they don't want that for us. Just look to the cross and know that you are reconciled. Amen.